Nice to meet you.
Hello. Nice to see you, Cristina.
Oh, so great, so
Buongiorno.
great. Buongiorno to you, which it's very early in Brazil, in Rio at the moment. It's 9 o'clock,
Yeah, it's
isn't
a little bit. Yeah.
So thank you for your availability. I was taking some time to describe why we wanted to do that, me and my colleagues that are among the public at the moment. And as I wrote to you and to the other colleagues, friends that will take part of these chats, it's just a way to start to try and share some ideas and some feelings that we have during this time, which is a very difficult time to a certain extent, but it might be also a time in which we can take advantage of reflecting, of changing ourselves, our way of doing things, and our way to deal with culture, which is very important for me. So we decided to have this little chat. I hope we'll stay in 15 minutes, but otherwise, if you can give us just 5 minutes longer or come another time for another chat.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It will be a pleasure.
Okay, so to all the public, as you read in the presentation that we sent out, Bruno Brulon is a professor of museology at the Federal University in Rio de Janeiro, and is the not so brand new, but the new chairperson of ICOFOM, the International Council for Museology of ICOM, and he is acting this role after having been one of the pillars of ICOFOM, and I was very proud and honored to sit for a little while on the same board with him. So now, Bruno, as I wrote to you, how's the situation in your country? That's reading from abroad. It's very difficult to understand exactly the extent of what's going on a cultural level. If you want to say something.
It's very complicated, but I'll try to give you a little bit of what's happening here. And of course, every context of the world has its own complications right now. Even though we are going through the same phenomenon, the same pandemics, the reactions and the different approaches from different governments makes it different from one context to the other. So first of all, I would like to start saying that we have all followed with great attention the example from Italy, which was one of the first places to do a very effective lockdown. And I think this was a paramount example to the world. So you have my full solidarity. And here in Brazil, we have all been very attentive of the Italian example. So our situation was a little bit similar in the beginning. Actually, yesterday it completed 1 month of official lockdown. We have been here working from homes for 4 weeks exactly. And now we are already seeing some new developments from our government. Of course, all our institutions are closed for this period. All our museums have been closed. Universities have been closed, of course. We cannot teach. And we have had a long discussion. We still have a discussion to think about how the academic semester is going to continue from now on. But for now, everything is suspended. Museums have been doing some online activities and showing what they can show to the public in the internet. But of course, in Brazil, we have had a different position from our national government and a lot of mixed messages, which gave somehow even more complicated situation for the states, because each state has had a different approach to the crisis, to the health crisis and to the lockdown. So some states have been in lockdown for a bit longer than 1 month. Others have a more flexible situation right now, but it all depends on the governors, because as you know, our president is not completely convinced by science right now and is not necessarily recommending the lockdown. So this puts us in a very delicate situation, and we have to trust science right now, which for me is one of the reasons why the role of the museums is so important at this moment, and probably for the future on. As we have seen after every crisis, after, like in the Second World War, after the war, the museums were huge institutions for the development of societies, and I'm positive that this is going to be the same thing when we are through this situation, these terrible situations.
Yes, I agree with you, and I was surprised to hear that universities are completely closed. You don't make online teaching, for instance, don't you?
Well, we can make some online activities, but for this moment, all universities have decided not to use the internet for official classes, mostly because we have a great diversity of students and a great diversity of economic situation. Not I can say for myself that not all my students have access to the internet or to a computer in order to have classes. So it would be, for now, necessarily excluded to decide to start a semester as with online classes. We are not prepared to do that, and this is one of the things that this situation in Brazil have proven to us, that most of our universities are not prepared, or don't have enough equipment, or don't have enough infrastructure, or the professors are not trained for it. So it's much complicated than that, and we have a huge movement from the union against teaching with digital tools, and we are discussing it now. Probably as the situation advances, we're going to have to find a way to do it, because the predictions is that we're going to have to stay in this situation for a while. So I'm sure some other possibilities will arise, but for now it's a big discussion, and it's a political discussion, not only a matter of education.
Yes, and what about museums? Are they equipped to go online? And what do you think? What do you think of the offer that they can do? They can offer right now to the visitors?
Well, many museums are offering virtual exhibitions and visits, and even some are more developing new ways of digital communication through video, through images, and there are really many interesting initiatives happening, not just in Brazil, but all around the world. But of course, we cannot forget that despite these new initiatives, the museums are suffering with this crisis, and especially with financial support. And ICOM has been doing a great research to understand how much museums will lose with this lockdown during the next months. And I think it's very important for us to understand the extent of this crisis. And I think this is the time to be really caring for our museum professionals and workers, because, for instance, here in Brazil, I know this is not the case everywhere in the world, but here our government has proposed a constitutional amendment that allow private institutions to fire their workers. So we are already facing the situation of unemployment with professionals from cultural institutions and museums. And it's very delicate situation because a lot of people are going to suffer from this, and there is at this moment there is not much we can do except to establish some networks and solidarity actions towards them.
Yes. But how is organized the management of culture in Brazil? Does it depend from the federal law or from each state law?
No, mostly depends on federal law. But and most our museums are federal institutions. But recently we have seen a great movement for museums to depend on private investments in Brazil. There is actually, this is what this current government has put their support, and a new, for instance, 2 years ago, the proposal of a new agency to manage museums in terms of financial support have started. This was not approved, but it's still a present idea. And even before the lockdown, a lot of museums were discussing self-management and a way to be sustainable and not to depend on the government for support. And then this happens, and we have to ask ourselves how many museums can actually depend on private institutions to support them, because at this moment the private companies and institutions are actually taking off all their money from museums, and no new project has been approved. I have just seen a news here in Rio that the government of Rio will be launching a grant for cultural activities in a few days, but it's a very low budget grant. So as we see it, it's just a way to manage the crisis, not so that it's not as bad as it can be, but it will not solve the problems, and it will not give jobs to all the people who are losing their jobs right now.
Yes, and so how do you see the future? How do you see it can be museum? What do you think museum can do when the epidemic will be over, or when we will start again, forcefully or not, to go out and start a normal life?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to be normal as before. I think a lot of things are going to change after this crisis, and we have to be prepared for that. But that said, as I said before, I think museums have a great role in moments of crisis, especially in the communication with society. I think this is a moment where museums have to use their credibility, a credibility that has been historically built, in order to make society, for instance, believe in science, because here in Brazil we have a great discussion about scientific facts and fake news against scientific facts, which is one of the problems why the lockdown is not being taken seriously by the people. So museums have a great importance in this process of communicating to people and make science accessible to all, because this is one of the problems. If science is not accessible, people are not going to believe scientific facts, and museums have a role in this process, which for me, it's major. So I think this is a moment, an opportunity for us to realize this important role of museums and try to move forward, trusting these institutions and making them, giving them the value that they deserve.
Do you? This is maybe a tricky question. I don't know if you feel you can answer. But do you think that at this time, in this period, museums can reach the poorest part of the population that's all around the world? But talking about Brazil, it's relevant as in other parts of the world. I mean, also all the native community, which is, from my point of view, a little bit. It seems to be abandoned by the attention of the government, let's say so, and then all the people in the favelas that I remember when I came to Rio in ICOM General Assembly, and so how can museums reach those sectors of a population during these times?
Well, of course, this is a delicate question to answer, but museums are not always accessible to all, and we know that this is a historical fact. It's an elitist institution. But here in Brazil, we have many types of museums, and we have a particular great field of community museums and community initiatives that are devoted to these specific groups that you are referring to, not only indigenous groups, but minority groups and social movements, for instance. And these museums have been doing a great work. Of course, as I said before, in the previous years, we have a very difficult policy in the cultural field in my country. And for these museums, of course, those are the poorest museums, and their actions have been reduced. Severely reduced, but they still exist. We have, for instance, a very potent social museology network that somehow unites most of these activities. I have a project, for instance, in the creation of a community center for LGBT community in an ONG that does charity work and social assistance to the LGBT community. And in this moment, of course, these museums are not going to solve everybody's problems, but I'm sure they can create visibility for the groups who are less visible right now and who are suffering the most. So I have already seen a movement from museums to make awareness for these communities, and even to start charity networks, for instance, to support people who now need something to eat. So it is really a very sensitive topic for our museums, but of course, not for the central museums, not for the state museums who are trying to stay alive right now, but the smaller museums are doing that.
So, Bruno, our 15 minutes are almost over, and I would like to finish asking you three counsels, through three suggestions: a book to read, a museum, a Brazilian museum to visit when we will travel again, and a Brazilian museum to visit online.
Okay, I'll try to answer your questions. I haven't prepared for this.
No.
But well, I would have to also give a fourth suggestion that is related to the others, because I have to, for people to access ICOFOM's website. We have many publications there, many publications about museums, and this would be my first suggestion. I think there are new books being launched this week, including about Latin American museology, so I definitely recommend these readings. Also, stay connected to the network, because we have here in Instagram, we have been posting different initiatives of museums, of online museums. But in Brazil, we have a particular very interesting museum, which is the Museum of People, Museu da Pessoa, which is a virtual museum. It has always been a virtual museum, and it's very famous because it's based on the lived history of individuals, and it deals with different topics, and I think it's a very nice museum to visit for sure. I'm sorry, what was the third thing? Have I answered them all? The museum for when you come. Yeah, well, I definitely suggest you to see the less known community museums in Brazil, the museums related to the people, not just favela museums, but several other museums like Museu das Remoções, which is a museum connected to social movement against gentrification. The museum I said I worked is the Memory Center for LGBT community. A lot of indigenous museums and small museums that are very interesting for anyone who visits Brazil.
Well, so I don't know. There is a question talking about the importance of science and museums. Do you think that museums will take other global crises, such as climate emergency, as seriously as this one we are experiencing?
Well, I think for sure they should. Actually, climate change has been a very hot topic for museums recently. Not only scientific museums, but also community museums. ICOFOM recently, we have started a project on museums, community action, and decarbonization. And one of the topics inside this project is climate change. Because, for instance, for community museums in the Cayman Islands, for instance, which is one of our partners, it is a very sensitive topic, the climate change situation, or museums in the Pacific or in Central America in general. So these are topics that have already been approached by museums and are very delicate. And yes, I think that with the current crisis, we can think about the scientific matters with giving it the importance that they deserve.
Perfect. So, Bruno, thank you very much for having broken the glass with your first chat. And really, if you have time, maybe in the next days, whenever you feel, maybe we can go on with some other chat, maybe focusing a little bit more on the new trends in ICOFOM with your direction. So thank you again.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to see you first thing and to talk to you and for what you said. Good luck for everything. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you, Christina. Good luck for you also. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everything. Goodbye. See you in 2 days.
See you. Yeah.